Welcome to Design TV. I'm Pamela Jacqueline, Editor-in-Chief of Luxe Interiors and Design. Today, I am so happy to be speaking with acclaimed designer Suzanne Kessler. She is the queen of luxurious classic interiors. Every space she works her magic on is crisp, clean, and beautiful. Suzanne is truly an inspiration to so many of us. Her warmth, talent, and flawless taste may be just what we need right now. And Suzanne, it's really good to see you virtually, of course. How are you?
Well, I am doing really good, and it's so good to see you. I have felt like this connection that we've been able to do on the Zoom calls and all of the things we've been doing with the calls have been really keeping me feeling connected to our community.
I know it's so important because we're so used to being out and about at a cocktail party or an event. And so now it's like massive amounts of screen time.
Well, I think everyone was feeling, it's so interesting because remember I would run into you and then we'd say, did I just see you here in another city, another city? So I do think it's been an important kind of anchoring for all of us during this time.
Yeah, and we're all in our homes. You're in Atlanta, I presume, yes?
Yes, I am. I'm in Atlanta.
The last time I saw you in real life was at your room at the Kips Bay Palm Beach Show House. And to me, Suzanne, it was like walking into this beautiful Palm Beach garden room. It was just glorious. And I remember talking to you about how the architecture of that space, it was a great room, but the architecture was very wonky. The ceilings were irregular. And I know architecture is very important to you. That's often where you start your projects. How did you fix it so that you could decorate it? You know, what did you talk a little bit about the space?
Well, what is interesting about that space is the show house was held at Lars Bolander's home. And he actually has moved from that home, but I had been to dinner in that same room. He had a designer dinner one year, a few years ago, and I had dinner in his space. And as you know, he is a renowned designer, and he had an amazing collection in that room. So as a designer coming in to do a space that someone else has already lived in, I was excited and challenged. But when it was emptied out of all of his beautiful things, the space architecturally, I always do start with the architectural envelope. And what happened is the two ends of the room, nothing did kind of line up architecturally. So what I ended up doing is I added a really thick molding because the peak of the roof, there was no molding on it because he was keeping it very modern. And he had like big, huge architectural elements hanging everywhere. So I added this crown mold that was very deep, about the width of the beam that was coming across one side of the room. And he had all the 6 French doors in the room. And I wanted the height of the room to be more architectural. So I added these what would have been round windows, which is always a detail that is so beautiful architecturally. And we mirrored them, but put the mullions in. And as soon as we put them in and the contractor was doing the work, the room, even empty, was transformed.
Yeah, it is amazing.
Always about the architecture. And then you start doing the layering and everyone, it was funny when I took the room because I love big spaces.
Yes.
And I love the room, the space of the room anyway. But a lot of the designers were like, boy, that is going to be really a challenging room. And for me, it ended up being probably one of my very favorite rooms that I have designed at any time.
So there were many things that we loved about the room. But 2 standouts were, and I want to know like what came first. It's like the chicken or the egg. It was the De Gournay Sanssouci wallpaper that you had, done in like in a white, and then the amazing Benjamin Moore, Curtis Salmon, high gloss pink painted, bookshelves or walls that you had. So talk a little bit about that because those were 2 like really particularly amazing parts of that space.
Well, I decided that I wanted the room to be white, as everyone knows, but I really, really struggled with coming to that conclusion. First I was going to paint the ceiling a color and then the trim a color. I finally came back to the high gloss Benjamin Moore white dove that I am kind of known to use all the time. And so I then painted everything first white. I worked with the Degrenee because I love, when you think of Palm Beach, what I love, I've been going to Palm Beach. My parents have a place there. I've been going for the last 20 years. It is my favorite place to go. But I've always say, you know, if you're going to be in Palm Beach, I want it to have the feel of Palm Beach and kind of what I call the classic timeless Palm Beach. What I wanted was the flower pattern, the Degrenee. I love to use Degrenee. And as you know, wall covering is resonating in design today in a different way. But I really, again, had a challenge on how to do the wall covering in a room this large. So we ended up creating our own molding, and I picked a very odd kind of place architecturally to stop it. And then we went up in the center, and the Degrenee people worked with me on this beautiful white background with very subtle colors that would pick in the yellow and the salmon and the greens of Palm Beach. And that pattern, it was just so beautiful when it was put up. So then when I was working on the room, the debate was the bookcases. Now these bookcases were already there, existing. And I kept thinking I wanted one strong color in the room, because the way, you know, a room comes in, that bookcase wall didn't really relate architecturally again to anything. So I decided just to paint it and have it be its own, like it's almost its own little special.
Wonderful.
And it really was kind of the most gorgeous color. And what was so interesting, and I think this happens with interior designers, I had a coat I'd found in Paris, a sweater, and this kind of skirt, but they were that exact color of the Benjamin Moore color, because it really is a fashion color pink. It wasn't, you know, it's a color that was really being done in fashion. And what I kept seeing, even because fashion is always an inspiration for me, I kept seeing yellow. So when we were doing the Degrenee, I could bring in the little yellow flower, and I was able to bring in only like 3 little pieces of yellow in the room that was all white with the salmon pink. And I did love how it kind of all layered in.
Yeah, it was really beautiful.
Thank you.
So yeah, and I love the color, but you know, one of the things that you are really known for is, and that was in that space, is sort of white upholstery, which really scares me so much. I remember, Suzanne, one of my first sofas back like before kids, and I was like, I want a white sofa. So I ordered a white sofa. It came. I think maybe my kids were little, and I think it lasted in my house for maybe a week before I was like, what was I thinking? Return the sofa. But how do you keep it, you know, for people that love, you know, your look and the white upholstery, how do you keep it practical?
Well, today, the great thing about all these white fabrics, there's so many fabrics that have a lot of material in them that help them perform way better than they ever used to. But I will tell you, for all of our family houses, I order these blankets that I put on the sofas. And because I always want my clients to have the white sofa, because what I want is the sofa to be only a layer in the composition of what we're putting into the room. And I will sometimes do a color sofa in some places, but I really don't always want it to be the thing that's kind of standing out, at least in a lot of my interiors. So and I'm actually putting an appeal out to John Robshaw to do the blanket he's done for years. I ordered dozens of them, and every time we would do a project, I would lay them out on the sofa bed, and then the clients, we tuck them in, they look great as part of the job. So I think what I have done is always bring in blankets and tell the clients, we fabric our, you know, the sofas, we get performance fabrics, and also might order a few extra yards of fabric for our clients for the seats, because then you can kind of have the freedom of using the white upholstery.
Yeah, but right. It is. Yeah, I know. Trust me, 20 years ago, performance fabrics were not what they are today. They have come a long way. I love the blanket because I have 2 little doggies, and sometimes they just, you know, eat too much, and then it's a whole problem. So, okay, good Suzanne Kessler tip. So, I'm also interested, it's so interesting, like, of like, how did you become Suzanne Kessler and your style, which is just to die for. And I wonder how much of it, so many people are influenced by, where they live, where they come from. And you were raised in the Midwest, you eventually moved to Atlanta. I think that design in the South is the aspect of home just means so much entertaining. And can you talk a little bit about where your influences have come from, and also, does the South is the South part of an influence of how you've evolved as a designer?
Well, it's interesting. Over really when I started writing my books for Rizzoli, I really had stopped to think, and because that was always a question that was asked, talking about the story behind how you became where you are. And I had to kind of go back. I grew up really in a military family, and we moved every 2 years. So the only semblance of a home that I remembered was going every year, once a year, we go to my grandparents' house in Indiana, small town in Indiana. And we actually would go antiquing, and my grandmother made quilts. And that is so interesting that years later, I didn't ever connect them until I started really thinking about how did I feel about houses becoming so special to me. Because what I kind of think I have wanted to do is just create beautiful homes for people, maybe because I moved all the years of my life. And now I've been living in Atlanta. I was in Indianapolis, and met my husband, John, and we moved with our daughter, Alexandra, to Atlanta. And it's been over 20 years ago. And when I came to Atlanta, I had been doing commercial design and loving residential design because of the travel and antiques. So I decided only to focus on high-end residential. And there's nothing like the focus of designing homes in the South. There's fabulous architects and interior designers and resources. And when I moved here, all these antique shops and the connection, even from Atlanta to Europe, it was almost like unbelievable at the time. So what I was able to do at that time was bring kind of this commercial kind of background that I had. And I'm an an architect by training from the Cincinnati Design School. So working just with residential, what I really discovered in the South is that whole creating a lifestyle. That really is truly how the Southern people live. And people use their silver in China, and they really use their homes differently. Yeah. I've really seen anywhere. And I remember even when we were looking to buy a house, whether you go, it didn't matter what house you went in, small, medium, or larger, everyone was sensitive and appreciated good design.
Yeah, I also feel like you have a very, an international flavor. I know France is a place that has influenced you, your product. And I also, I think that is also sort of infused into what you do as well.
Continental feel. Obviously, like many people, when I went to France, that was truly a whole influence that I have continued to bring French modern and French style into my design aesthetic for many years. And even before, I think that things were, right now there's some more modern mixed in with things. I've always loved that mix. And I think that you see it most when you travel in Europe.
And there's two other, elements that I want to touch upon from your work. I just think you're an amazing editor, Suzanne, right? I mean, I think probably one of the trickiest things to do with fashion and also with interiors is sort of like the final edit. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because your rooms are layered and interesting, yet extremely well edited, not too much so, but just like perfect. Talk a little bit about how you edit a room.
What I like to do, first of all, today, it is all about the edit. All the clients we have, they are wanting their spaces edited. and people are wanting to live in a way that has the detail and collections, but done in a more simple way. So the way, though, I have always loved the edit of a room because then you can really appreciate the space you're in. So I guess the thing that I love to do, I think a lot of it is how you mix the different pieces of furniture and how you end up bringing in objects that are kind of a surprise or that maybe are unexpected. And I think that kind of combination gives the room style and personality. Kind of like how I always think of as fashion. I kind of have a very classic way of putting myself together, but then I might love the jewelry and accessories that kind of give it kind of, that might be from Marnie or Celine or, you know, something that's kind of a surprise. And I love to do that kind of concept in my interiors. And when I do go shopping, even for our clients, I do not consciously go out buying things. I just buy things I like. And then what happens is I have a number of these things around, and it's surprising. It's always a surprise, even to my great design team, how those things will translate into our interiors. And one of the funny things that happened at Kips Bay, which really was very random, the little iron chair that had the yellow cushion.
Yes.
Was kind of one of the last pieces that I said, I'm going to bring this iron chair, and I don't have any yellow now because somehow the yellow kept going away every time I tried to use it. And I said, I'm going to just put one yellow cushion. I have a yellow painting and a yellow throw in the room with all of the pink, and it will be this great juxtaposition with all the white. So we brought that chair, and I had so many people commenting on this funny little piece. So it's almost like thinking of objects with kind of style and whimsy. And I do think as designers, that is probably what does set us apart, that we can actually find those things and really use them and translate them into a composition. And as you saw in my room there with all the rattan, but I didn't want it to be the cute wicker outdoor space. I love all the rooms that were done in Italy years ago, where you see the wicker used. People used to use wicker in the main living room, but they would be on those houses in the coast of south of France or Italy. So I was trying to, I love that, but so I love that mix that is not, and it does take a designer shopping and exploring and kind of taking a risk and maybe buying things. When we bought the big daybed that was rattan, it was 6 inches, maybe 7 inches taller. It looked like a big elephant. And when we delivered to my office, the fun thing is they're always commenting, and designers can always fix things. We cut off the legs, but anyway, I think that's kind of the fun thing about
you have all of your tricks. So it's interesting because you are like so many designers, you know, and we all love in this industry, like get on an airplane. Like, isn't it amazing how like we're now still?
Yes.
And I'm like going, oh my God, it's day 77. And I think I left my house 4 times. And you know, it's
just watching you making those comments and relating very much to that kind of thing where you are still. It's been very very different, but for all of us.
For all of us, right? But it's interesting as a creative person, as a designer, you know, Suzanne, you know, you're accustomed to traveling and seeing, and so your eye is right getting refined every time you go out or you source something or you see something that you're then gonna edit into a room. Are you staying inspired right now at a time that you sort of have to be sheltering in place? Talk a little bit about that and how it's for you in your work and for yourself.
Well, it was interesting when we first, obviously the first few weeks of the shelter in place were very shocking to all of us. So then we kind of had time then we had this quiet time and we're not traveling, you know, being home more. And I did find, I was really finding that I was very creative. And I do really love Instagram and the social media things that we have. And I could really catch up on my favorite magazines, which I'm normally reading on the airplane. And I was really noticing that when I would we started then having these Zoom meetings with some clients during that period of time. And I really found a lot of us in our team, we were really having time to be a little more creative differently. We had a little more time. And so many of the things that we have traveled, you travel and you're absorbing so much. You sometimes look at things that you saw a year, 2 years, 3 years ago, and you kind of bring them into your, the new project or your new, you're thinking about something you've been to. So it was interesting how that, I think I've had so many fabulous experiences that I found it to be a really creative time.
Yeah.
And I did actually have time to figure out how to translate those.
Process it. It's such a good point. It's like we're so busy running and seeing and
Right.
that it's such an interesting thing. Like we sometimes don't have time to process. And I think,
Right.
think about even something like High Point. You go there and everyone's like, what did you see that you loved? It's like I can't even process what I saw.
Right.
And
Well,
it is.
so it's interesting how that. So I really found this time of quietness to be very creatively inspiring time for me.
Oh, good. Well, we can't see what.
And at the same time, I was also, as the opposite, stressed.
Yeah. So, I wanted to ask you, it's such a weird yet an interesting time, especially for us in, residential design. And, we've all been in our homes. You have clients all over the country, Suzanne, that you're speaking with, and also, your home and your thinking. How, what do you think is going to come out of this in terms of, in design, it's like the pendulum's always swinging and not so much. I don't really love trends. I think classic timeless design is the way to be. But what do you imagine in terms of, architecture and the way what people are going to want out of their homes? Talk a little bit about that with us.
Well, a couple of things that we started seeing as we were talking to a lot of the clients. First of all of our clients that we have right now and the clients that we had finished houses, they started sending us messages because everyone was at home and they were appreciating their homes, enjoying their homes, and then needing some updates on their homes. It was kind of like we'd get the list, our pillows, the dog ate, or whatever is happening, and so. But what I really realized, and I think what everyone has been talking about, is how important, and which designers, we've talked about that, how homes do make a difference in people's lives. And all of us who do this design work, we have such a passion for making people's lives better, really, because we love working with the people, and we certainly love architecture and design, and to see it translated and then to see our clients really we got a number of messages. They love being in their new homes or whatever homes they were able to be in. So I then have felt that our business and the home design business will continue to really be, it may be different than the way we've done it before, but I do think it's going to be a very strong focus in our future. And I think a lot of people are seeing that. I just don't know how, if it's, we don't know how with the industry behind us. As you know, we're only as good as our resources.
Yes. Yes.
And one of the things, we were talking about, even trying to, and the inspiration we get from the magazines and our Instagram, all of that right now has kind of had us stopping or kind of a quiet time. And we're not sure how that's going to kind of come back.
Yeah.
I really, that I'm not sure about, but the other thing I've started seeing is this really big impact on the inside and outside living it's been really a huge thing that's been happening for the last few years. That whole LA way of living, even if you live somewhere that's doesn't even have that weather, people are still launching that inside outside living.
Yeah, and I think that they
huge focus
to nature. It's really
have any of us taken as many walks in the neighborhoods we live in as we did during this time? And I think that it kind of started showing people the inside and outside of a home. the whole thing is kind of a big focus. So I think the design business, I'm very optimistic about it as an overall business. And the architects and everyone that I've talked to, our clients are really going forward for the most part on their projects.
Yeah, I know there's a big prediction. We've heard a lot about, in 2021, like second half of 2021, that there'll be a lot of, movement forward. I do want to touch upon one or two more things. Your collections, your beautiful, wonderful, amazing collections of hickory chair and Ballard and visual comfort and Lee Joffa. Talk a little bit about product design. Are you working on anything? Which of the pieces that you've made do you love? Just curious what's happening in that world for you.
Well, the product business for me has just been a wonderful and special dimension of my design business. I probably for the last 12 years, I've been working on the relationships I've had with these collections really a long time. And the thing that I think really I can bring to my collections and my partners, because I love design and I'm working on clients all the time, that's really my passion, is designing homes. I am always seeing what things designers need or we're looking for in our projects. Because as I said, it's kind of a composition. So I have found that having these, I go shopping and I'll find pieces, and usually I like things for myself for our house, and then I'll want them again. And that's a lot of the things that I have bought for myself have translated into product.
Is this like this bench behind you, Suzanne,
that
I'm Googling this bench?
Well, the Swedish Bench, I love the Swedish Bench. And when I was getting ready to do my 10-year launch for Hickory Chair, I wanted to do the Swedish Bench. I've always loved the Swedish pieces and the French modern pieces and kind of the classic continental pieces. I've always loved that I don't have to put a definitive, time or a period on my style. So I brought this antique bench to Hickory Chair, and we actually incorporated it and made it for my collection. And the one that they made is so beautiful. But what was so special is the factory, because they do so much of their work in America and in their factory in North Carolina. They were all so excited when I came up to look at the prototypes, because they had captured the little nuance of the wood molding of every slat. And I didn't know if this was going to be too detailed for them to translate. And it's really one of my most beautiful pieces in the collection. So I think that what's exciting for me, and it's exciting to see, we all love the artisans and the people that make things for all of us. So when I can work with fabric, with the Lee Joffa, with Ballard and hickory and circa lighting and visual comfort, I think translating those things into all these products, it really is exciting for me as a designer to really be able to bring things that I can share with so many people.
Yeah, well, we love what you do, and we are really excited to see what comes next from you, your beautiful homes. It's great to see you virtually, and thanks for being part of DesignTV. We appreciate it.
And we love all your art that you're doing too. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Terrebonne. I'm the editor-in-chief of Galerie magazine, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by our summer issue cover stars, Bryan Graybill and Andrew Cogar. We have Bryan's beautiful East Hampton home featured on the cover of our summer issue, which is all about artful escapes, and boy, is this house one. And the backstory behind it is even more amazing than the beautiful images in the story. So Andrew, Bryan, thank you so much for joining us here today on Design TV with Galerie Magazine.
Thanks
you
for
having us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure.
So I'd love to just kick off our conversation. Bryan, if you could tell us a little bit about your history as a designer. You have a tremendous resume working for, David Collins Studio, one of the best firms out there. So if you can tell me more about your life in the design world.
I started out in real estate. My family's in property development, and I was always fascinated by the design aspect of the business, but actually started off in the hotel industry. I went to the hotel school at Cornell and then graduated and then went into sort of advisory and property development. But I was always really attracted to design and wanted to hone those skill sets. So a little bit later in life, I went back to graduate school, went to the architecture school at Columbia, and then I was really looking for a mentor, and I sought David Collins out, and he really proved to be an amazing mentor and friend. And then I started my own firm, maybe, I guess it was about 5 or 6 years ago.
That's really beautiful with hands-on service. And Andrew, tell us more about historical concepts. I love so many of the houses that you've done really feel like they've been there for centuries, but really they're your brainchild and totally new invention. So tell us about you and historical concepts.
Well, I think you actually summed it up really well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, just as the name implies, with historical concepts, the idea is to kind of take the best of the past and be respectful of it and bring it forward and make it relevant and current and fresh for today. And I think, especially as you'll see with Bryan's project, there was a ton of opportunity to research and learn from the past, but to make it new, have a twist of invention, a twist of whimsy, and really kind of celebrate the clients in the design just as much as celebrating architectural history. And that's where I think we really excel, is understanding our clients' needs, understanding our clients' personalities, and really adapting their wants and needs to the local and regional precedents. So when people feel like it's always been there, like you said in the opener, that's our biggest compliment. We don't want to knock people over with being so new and bold that it looks out of place in 5 years. We want it to feel like it's new, but it's also timeless. And
So how did the two of you come to work together? How did this collaboration?
I went to a show house that Andrew had worked on in Bridgehampton maybe like 12 years or so ago, and I thought it was really cool. But I didn't really connect him with the project. And I called up a friend of mine, Stephen Gambrell, and I said, I'm starting this project. I said, I'm particular, and who do you recommend? And he's like, you have to work with Andrew. He said he gets it. He's the right guy, and he's going to kind of be able to take some of the notions you throw out there and really help land the plane. So he put me in touch with Andrew, and then we had an introductory call and just really hit it off. I wasn't that familiar with a lot of their work. I'd looked at some of the portfolio online, and Andrew came and visited with me, and I sort of went off on a diatribe of what I wanted to achieve with the property and the house. And he took these very detailed notes, and he goes, well, I'd like to go show you one of my projects. And then he took me, and I was just like blown away. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm sitting here telling this fella all these sort of very basic things. And then he shows me this. I was like, oh my God, I'm so humble now.
You're like,
So
he gets it.
He gets it.
So what were those initial ideas that were being bantered back and forth? What's the concept and the story that you started with for this project?
So I wanted the house I really had strong notions of the program of the house, and I was a bit open to the style of the house, but I knew there were certain things that I needed the house sort of to be and to do. And there were certain layouts or spatial ideas that I had about the house. But I like to have people over a lot. I like to have people over for short periods of time or to be guests and stay. But I want to always be able to participate with the guests and not feel like I'm sort of the, maitre d' or necessarily the innkeeper where I'm running around keeping everyone happy. I want to be right there in the middle of it. So I described that to Andrew and I said, I want things to be sort of very intuitive and the opposite of intimidating when people come into the house. And I said, I want to have an L porch so that we can access sort of the side kitchen from the same entrance that the guests would come into. And I want it to be fairly intuitive of where the guests should come in. At our old house, Dan and I had a house around the corner. We had a center-loaded corridor, and people would come sometimes through the front door, sometimes through the back door. And it was sort of this ping pong back and forth of where to try to go to meet guests. So we try to lay the house out that it would be sort of intuitive where people should come in. And then from that experience coming into the house, I wanted to be able to sort of greet people, but also if people were staying, I wanted them to sort of know where to kind of take their boots off or their shoes if we were out and it was muddy or we were running around and doing whatever, and not have this sort of schizophrenia between coming in through a mud room versus coming in through the front door.
Right.
And I wanted to have a big living room, big drawing room that that could sort of open up and contrast with seasons or with time of day or with the number of guests. And then the other part of the program was to have sort of a ground floor master so that if it were just Dan and I, we could close off the master and just feel like we were in a very intimate space. And then also be separated from the guests maybe at night or especially in the morning. We're not like super morning people. So that's sort of the program.
There's some understatement in that,
Having
but
guests too. It's like in the morning, people kind of need their own time to wake up, and you don't want to feel as a guest that you're imposing on your host. Like,
Exactly.
you see me now, but you also don't want as a host like them to feel lost.
Exactly.
That was what was fascinating in our early conversations is that, and Bryan has got such a great sense of humor. And I think that is also another thing that we've definitely been able to relate to and keep the projects fun and keep them fresh. And I think that sense of humor also takes the edge or the fear off of getting it wrong, so to speak. So it allows us as a firm, and Bryan was very flattering, but there's a whole team behind us. So, but that allows us as a firm to really experiment and push the boundaries and try. And I think that because Bryan gets the process part of it, maybe more than a lot of other clients, that really allows us to kind of bring our A game. And I don't think you get there unless you kind of do a little bit of trial and error. And if you're afraid to fail, you'll never get it right. But he took that off the table.
So how is that as an architect to have the designer as a client? Is that helpful, or sometimes are there challenges with that too?
I think it's completely helpful. I mean, certainly there are some challenges, but those challenges are new and they force us to grow because we're always going to have to keep pushing and pushing. And because, I mean, we may not get it right the first, second, third, fourth, fifth time. There's always lessons learned. And I mean, and Bryan had mentioned Stephen, and that's where we really got in that rhythm working with Stephen early on. And so by the time we met with Bryan, I think it was a totally different conversation, both stylistically and program. But the idea of how to collaborate with the designer that is the client and when to kind of try and recognize when Bryan's speaking as the client versus speaking as the designer, because there's different questions that we need to ask and respond to. And so trying to kind of learn him and understand which hat he's got on, because one is more emotional, one is more, I think, technical. And I think also, especially if we're looking at projects that maybe are, their personal projects that they're looking to possibly sell in the future. So there's always this balance on the business versus art versus living. And to me, when that person is one and the same, it's very, very interesting because you can be nimble, make great mind moves, and come from a really informed place. You're never having to kind of guess into what three different people are thinking. You just have to have a deep conversation with that one or two people, with Bryan and Dan. And it's been great.
Well, I think there's something really about the house that goes, the technical aspects are all there and you can stare at each molding, each hinge, but also there's this layer of storytelling. Can you tell me about, you came up with a name for the house, that there's this real sort of history and mythology that you were creating there?
I think that came from a couple of different factors. Maybe the first factor is I'm a terrible technical drawer. My sketches look like the background of a Scooby-Doo cartoon. So for me to try to express something through drawing is a bit of a challenge.
Right.
So I leaned a bit more on storytelling and try to create a narrative of how this house would have evolved over time. And again, why I wanted to work with Andrew was to create a new home that felt authentic, or that it had this authentic history, even though it didn't, and we sort of made up the history. I wanted the house to ramble a bit and look as if it were added on over time, so that it would have sort of that, longevity and long life to it. So we borrow pieces of history from the area. We're sort of right in the village of East Hampton, and this area is surrounded by little bed and breakfast and inns. So it was very easy just to pull from that vernacular and to have that sort of as a takeoff point for what we wanted to create here. But we sort of dove into a character of a. We brought in the narrative of an English captain who had come to Sag Harbor and who was a whaling captain and very financially successful, and had a daughter who married a fifth generation East Hampton farmer whose family had to sell land off over time to sort of keep up with expenses. The daughter and the fellow married, but then he ran off with another woman and left her sort of high and dry, and the whaling industry dried up. And then she was forced to sort of let out rooms to make ends meet. And so we came up with that story of the Dowager. And it also sort of dovetailed with the fact that my friends say that I act like old ladies set in my ways. So it was sort of tongue in cheek with that as well. And then Andrew and his team sort of picked that up and just kind of ran with it. And sometimes we would force sort of these little side narratives onto the character. And then other times we would use it sort of as a stopgap and say, oh no, that's not what it would have happened in this narrative. And that sort of helped guide the process in the house. And
that's quite the story.
It's a long-winded story.
For Novel's book signing at the Hampton bookstore. That's really worthy of more than like, oh, let's just pretend like. Great, that's great. And
well,
so
it did take it to another level. I mean, it was
Yeah.
actually, Bryan's a really good creative writer, and it put architectural narratives are not new to our firm. I mean, it's a tool that we use all the time. I mean, we call it generational architecture, or we kind of look and see how a building could have learned and evolved through maybe multiple owners or just through the years. But to have such a specific backstory and such a specific character, which by the way is the icon is the painting behind Bryan. So that was our character during the process.
Your cover star, so yeah.
Yeah, our cover star.
So it took it to a whole nother level, because when we were talking about introducing new architectural elements, we just kind of tested it in the backstory. We didn't have to be beholden to it, but if it seemed to hunt with this character, that it could have come across her path or been something she was interested in, it suddenly kind of rang true architecturally. And for us, it was so much fun. And I do think it informed the process and let us be more bold and more playful. Then there's a lot of idiosyncrasies and quirks in the architecture that feel appropriate and feel rooted because there's this backstory there that someone could have had this amassed in their lifetime.
I love that. And I think, that entryway, that mudroom / foyer area captures that in such a way. Like you feel romance there. Can you tell me about the designing of that space, the fire, the paneling? Like it's wow.
Oh, thank you. I had a friend of mine, a Texan friend who lives in London, had invited me to go to a Scottish manor house. I don't know, it was maybe 8 or 9 years ago. And it was this whole journey to get there. It was, planes, trains, automobiles, and then ferries. And we finally get to this house, and it was sort of in the middle of kind of skyfall country. And I walk in, and there wasn't really a foyer. You were walking into a boot room, and the boot room was sort of styled very warm and cozy, and there was a fire going, and it really sort of welcomed you. And I thought, this is amazing that you can kind of walk in and be greeted in this room, sort of as your first point of entry, and not feel like you have to go around to a side entrance because you have kind of mud all over you. So that was the inspiration for creating something that felt more like a boot room than a foyer. And then I'd spent a good amount of time in London, and I'd worked with David Collins, and I'd worked loosely on, but this was sort of prior to my time, the Corbin and King restaurants.
Right.
So Fisher's or Delaney or the Wolseley, and David and Jeremy King had sort of really taken a lot of inspiration from Vienna and the secessionist period in Vienna, so sort of early 1900s. And so Andrew and I sort of batted around ideas, and it was sort of this kind of Scottish English notion of a boot room, but then we sort of leaned into this Viennese language with the banquettes there, and some of the paneling detail. It was kind of this
The mirrors wall at the stairs. I mean, a lot of play with light and shadow and manipulating scale, because it's a cozy small space, but we wanted it to retain that charm, but still hold a lot of interest and kind of set you up for the rest of the house.
Great. Well, if you're just joining us now, I'm Jacqueline Terrebonne of Galerie magazine, and we're talking about the house on the cover of our beautiful summer issue. It's Bryan Graybill's house. He's the homeowner, but also the designer, and also with Andrew Cogar of Historical Concepts, who collaborated with him on this beautiful East Hampton home. So back to secessionist furniture and those elements that are woven throughout. How do guests react to that? Like, what mood does that build for you then?
Well, it's great when I have guests over and they walk into that room, and it just sort of resets, I don't know, their experience. Or I wanted them to feel that they're coming into a space that is very cozy and sort of cocoon-like, even though we try to have a lot of light in the rest of the house, and just to have a sort of a moment of pause. And it's a great place to greet people and just say hello for a couple of seconds or a minute, have a quick conversation, and then bring guests into the living room. It also is a great space with Uber, because sort of at the end of the party, people have a place to go wait, and you're not sort of waiting around with them.
Right? You're like,
So
oh,
awkward.
wait, fine, just kidding. Still here. Maybe I'll have another drink.
I know.
The
Yeah,
long
like why
goodbye.
not?
It avoids the awkward long goodbye.
Exactly. And that drawing room, I think the windows are spectacular. Can you tell us more about the design ideas behind those and the challenges of maybe constructing those as well?
Well, for the house, I really wanted to lean into, for the architecture of the house, the exterior architecture, and a lot of the interior architecture as well. I wanted to sort of lean into British arts and crafts, which would have been sort of a celebration of the materials themselves and making the materials beautiful, but not sort of over embellishing the decoration on the elements. And at that time, with what was going on with industry, fabricators were learning how to stretch glass and do larger glass panels. And also because of the manufacturing that was going on in London in, say, the late 1800s, they needed the light because they had workers doing sort of very meticulous things, whether it be sewing or making whatever, and making it in quantity. So I love that sort of nod to early industry, but I also wanted things to feel very sort of hand-touched and handcrafted. So Andrew and I took a field trip to London, and I really loved the area in London. I really loved Marylebone, and we walked around and we took lots of pictures and went into different buildings and looked at a lot of the Muse houses, and that was sort of the inspiration for the windows here. So it was part Marylebone, that British arts and crafts, and then it was also part Savannah and Charleston, where there are these huge double hung windows in both of those towns. And Andrew actually had a source, a company called Millwork Artisans, and they specialized in these sort of historical, but up to code windows. And then I just let Andrew figure out all the logistics.
Well, I think you see so much more of that too in the kitchen, which is also so beautiful. What you've created there, that's a gorgeous kitchen.
Well, I'll let Andrew take it from there, because he was such the inspiration for the kitchen and for setting up that window rhythm and the door rhythms in there. I had shown him some images from the Cotswolds and some English country homes. Again, just in England, I think they don't ever take light for granted, and it's sort of part of their history. And
wherever you can.
They try to grab light wherever they can, and that would they really think about that when building and designing. So typically they will hang their windows very high, like very close to the header, to let the light come in. So it's more about the light than the view per se. And I think sort of historically, electricity has been sort of more expensive in the UK than it is in America. So they really think about these elements when they're designing. And then also the reflection of light, whether it be on high gloss paint or on mirror, and shared light between spaces as well. Whereas, you know, here in America, we may think of a room being defined by solid walls. They lean a lot more into the notion of defining zones or spaces through an interior transom or an interior window. So I showed images to Andrew, and then Andrew, you talk about how you kind of set that up in the orangery and the kitchen area.
Well, playing off of what you were saying too, I think that the other lesson that we learned going through London, and I had lived in Germany for 3 years and traveled through Austria pretty extensively as well. So a lot of these references that we were pointing to were things that were dear to me as well, and things that I had lived through. And I think what Bryan incorporated, you mentioned it earlier, but it's the earnestness that came from the Vienna Secession and the British Arts and Crafts, in that you don't have to style things in a way that apologizes for what they are. So the kitchen is kitchen, and it doesn't have all the high gloss. It has all the windows and the glass, but it actually has chalky walls, and it's focused more on, you know, the ability, kind of a rugged nature, to clean it up, hose it out like an orangery, and actually not have all the glare while you're working in the sun, bringing it in for all these citrus trees. You know, so there's all these little subtleties to the materials that are used and the function of the room that Bryan really leaned into. So, I mean, taking a step back to the parlor, high gloss there makes sense because it's going to be an evening room with low candlelight, and you want to maximize the light. The boot room is kind of in between. It uses mirrors to extend light through the day, but doesn't try and get too bright at night. So there's these layers, but also seasonality is a big part of it. You know, Bryan was always, even though this is a summer community and it's going to be a summer home, he was also thinking about uses in the fall, uses in the winter. And so that's where those big windows kick into play for sure, at the orangery and at the living room.
And then in the master suite, what are some of the levels and layers that you were constructing there? Because I think it's so beautiful and so impressive the way that space is set up.
Well, that actually carries kind of lessons from all of the rooms forward. So at the kind of it's a big lofty space, but Bryan didn't want it to feel too imposing. He wanted it to be cozy. He wanted that airiness, but he also wanted, you know, to feel like an intimate bedroom. And so I think having the scale of the wainscot, having the detail and the prismatic panels and kind of the reflectivity there, and then the plaster that he used to set off the art, and then the large ceiling tamed by planks that brought the scale down, and really beautiful art-like chandeliers. I think it all kind of comes together. So it's that chalky materiality and that soft glow kind of in upper levels like you see in the orangery, and a little bit more of the vibrant and vivid detail that brings it down to a human scale at kind of the lower level of the room. And it's that playful interaction is really what we were mocking up throughout the whole house.
And for how gorgeous the interiors are. I mean, the exteriors are pretty phenomenal, and you have a pretty sweet outdoor bar set up there too. I mean, I'll check into that in any day.
Well, you're welcome to come anytime.
But in the exteriors too, we were really looking then at a lot of the homes, farm homes that have been converted to inns in the immediate area. There was a lot of early kind of more primitive colonial architecture, like with the uneven siding that we were bringing into what we call the little schoolhouse, the little bar back there. There was a lot of cues that even though we were looking far afield for a lot of inspiration, we we're also at the same time keeping our eye local and trying to root it locally. Even like the entry hall is intentionally, when you look at the outside, that it's intentionally part of what would have been the old farmhouse narrative. So the ceilings are lower, everything's a little bit more confined, and then it kind of opens up in the plan to the outside. So we kind of worked from the inside out on this house. And I think it helped. So you can see those layers of time from the farmhouse to the inn to the larger estate, all kind of unfolding both inside and outside at the same time.
Well, it's a spectacular home. It's a beautiful story in our summer issue. I absolutely love it. I think it's so fantastic. It's inviting. The art that you've spread out throughout the house is glorious. The paint colors, the mixtures. I can't believe that you put all of that inspiration into one house, and it feels, I mean, it's amazing that you did that, but then it just feels so fluid and natural. It really does tell a story.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you.
It's been a really fun process. Thank you.
So I think it's amazing that you work together and that something this gorgeous came about. What is your favorite, for each of you, what's your favorite room in the whole place, or what's your favorite little nook or space?
For me, it's the living room. I'm here from the time I get up until the evening. I love the light. It just is full of light all day long. And I sit in the banquette doing my work during the day, or I will stand at the bar and spread out documents or files. So I sort of live in this room, and if I had to choose one room just to be in, I would be in the living room, sort of. Yeah. Well, I do choose to be in the living room most all the day.
Nothing like having a bar as a standing desk.
It's such a nice standing desk.
Andrew, what's the part of the house that you're most proud of or most enamored with?
Well, I have to say that I am extremely grateful that Bryan and I continue to have projects together, because it finds lots of great excises for me to visit and stay at the house. So I have a new favorite every time. Yeah. But no, all kidding aside, it's to me, I love the living room as well, the grand salon. But I would say some of the quieter spaces, the moment of repose, like the room that you can see just beyond Bryan, is a shared office and master parlor. But what I love about it is that it can open up to the grand salon, to the living room, and be an extension of the party. And you can walk down the master suite, or vice versa. You can close those big red doors behind Bryan and have it almost feel like a Manhattan apartment. It's got all the elegance. I mean, so you have this office, this living room, and then the sleeping quarters. That versatility I love. And anytime that we can do that in a house, it means it's going to be used often and loved. I think nothing's worse than that beautiful room that no one goes in except once or twice a year. That's terrible. That means
right, the pocket doors are always closed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
I mean, you might as well put plastic on the sofa. Right?
This has been amazing. I'm so excited to have this house in the summer issue of Galerie. Everyone that's watching, you have to read the full story in the magazine. It's absolutely breathtaking, and it's a beautiful journey that the two of you have been on together. It really is an artful escape that you've created, and
Thank you.
An incredible mixture of art and design and history and inspiration, all living and breathing there together. So thank you so much, Bryan Graybill, for sharing your house and your designs. And thank you, Andrew Cogar of Historical Concepts, for talking about the partnership that the two of you had together. And for everyone watching, pick up the summer issue of Galerie and be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie.